My 2 secrets to saying healthy all the time. And if you can't, use or
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Irenicast, the weekly podcast dedicated to conversations on faith and culture. We are your hosts. I'm Jeff.
I'm Mona.
And I'm Alan.
Thank you so much for joining us this week. This week, I think, is going to be a fun one. We're going to be talking about the church and politics. And for our segment, we're bringing in a new one called Out of Context, or as Alan suggested earlier.
No.
I forgot.
No, you're not going to say what I said earlier. That's inappropriate.
Something daddy.
Something daddy.
Something about censoring. Yeah. So
Censor me daddy. That's
Censor
what
me,
it was.
daddy.
No, we're not, okay.
And we
It
all
is.
immediately, Jeff and I were like, no.
Let's
Immediately.
move on from
We
that.
tried to
It's
censor you.
It is Super Tuesday. Let me censor you. It's Super Tuesday, right? This is wonderful. We're talking about politics. I like it.
What is Super
Yes.
Tuesday, Alan?
I don't know.
You
It's
don't
a
know?
wonderful day when states across the union gather together to nominate their two-party system candidates so that one of them can lead the free world. Right?
Yes.
Something
And that was
like
that was the perfect tone to communicate that.
Mhm. You're welcome.
It's the primary day, right? For
Mhm.
those of us who, just
So this
That just want to be concise in our communication.
Yeah.
It's primary day.
primary day.
This
Most
is
people
what-
are electing their primary candidates.
I want to talk about. I suggested this topic because I've been struggling recently with where to put politics in the church. Like, where do they belong? I grew up with conservative politics coming from the pulpit, and they really bothered me. And I read books like Jesus for President and Shane Claiborne's Irresistible Revolution. And so I got this sense that American politics didn't belong in the pulpit. But now that I'm kind of in a different place in my faith and I'm preaching all the time, when I study scripture, it just feels inherently political to me. So now there's liberal politics coming out of the pulpit from my own mouth. And I'm just wondering, am I doing the very thing that bothered me in the first place? So I need your help. You guys need to help me if you can.
Yeah, well, you're a minister, so you're responsible for preaching, and I bet these boundaries are super apropos for your immediate
Mhm.
context, right?
Yeah, the congregation is divided. We do have Republicans and Democrats in our congregation. And as you guys know, the whole country is divided along party lines. So how do you talk without ostracizing people? And should you be worried about ostracizing people? There's a lot of questions.
There's a lot of questions. And this is something I've wondered about for a long time as well, because I grew up with the politics coming through the pulpit. And a lot of it was because our senior pastor was a vet, and we were near a military base. We had a lot of military families. So there was a lot of prayers for support and things like that, and trying to support the families. And we even had for a while, a bulletin board in the sanctuary that had all of the people serving in active duty. And it was pray for them, And so for a long time, I really resented that, because I felt like it was kind of pro-war in some
Mhm.
ways. But I think in retrospect, now that I've grown up a little bit, I see that honestly, the pastor was just trying to provide to the families the best kind of support that he or the leadership team knew how, But I think that does verge into some shaky ground around supporting certain political candidates because they happen to be pro-military or there was a lot of that kind of stuff, and a lot of nationalism in our church's services. And even they did a big 4th of July musical every year. So that was always really hazy, because I think technically speaking, I don't think the government's ever cracked down on this that I know about. But I think technically speaking, a church's nonprofit status can be revoked if they endorse a specific candidate.
Yeah, that's the one thing is you can talk about issues, but you can't
Mhm.
support a candidate. But even issues bothered me in the past,
Because you can say, I support the person who yada yada, and everyone knows who you're talking about.
So it's subtweeting from the pulpit. Do you do that, Jeff? Do you get political when you preach and teach?
No, I don't.
Bull.
I don't. It depends. There was a time in my life where I was, the champion of right-wing ideals, and I was young and opinionated and brash. So to me, any platform to speak, if I could if I could shock someone, if I could Driscoll someone and, you know, to
You just referenced Mark Driscoll, who is coming back.
Believing what I believe, then I considered that a win. And, but I don't know. I feel like when I approach church, I approach it like I approach my Facebook page. Like if something's really important to me, I will put it out there in a way that invites discussion. And as soon as it turns into debate or argument, then I just check out or, you know, try to distract with humor or something like that. So when I think in the church in terms of politics, I think I'm fine with it depending upon where and how it's approached. If it's inviting discussion, then I think it's a good thing and it's a necessary thing in churches because we are a place where people can hopefully feel that they're being on a certain level rejuvenated or challenged, or more importantly, above all else, connected with a community, connected with other people. And I think part of connection is learning how to deal with conflict and how to learn difficulty. I think so many times we shift our churches and try to avoid disagreement and think that that's the perfect church. But I think the perfect church is one that's able to healthily move through disagreement and debate. So I think if you take out sparks to allow that to happen, then you might be doing a disservice to your church.
Yeah, maybe robbing them of their communal experience.
Yeah.
And their ability to develop critical thought.
Yeah, and I think it's true on both sides. Like, I think when the pulpit assumes that everyone is on like mind on an issue, then that's the problem. Because then that doesn't invite anything. All that does is isolate. And I've been on the side of both of those things where I've heard something from the pulpit that's very opinionated based, and I was like, yes, I agree with that. And then I've been for the latter part of my career in the evangelical church, I've been on the other part of that, where the more it was said in a way that said, this is where we believe, and if you don't believe this, you're not a part of us, then I felt more isolated and less connected to my community.
And it's interesting, like I think communities should be able to take stances on things, though. Like on the other side of this, I do believe diversity is important and debate and thought is important, but I think that there does come times when it is important to take really normative stances and say, no, Jesus would support the poor. I think there's some obvious ones. And
but even then, when you take a stand, I think you can do that in a way that invites people in, where you're saying, this is a stand that we're choosing to take right now. And even acknowledge, we understand that there may be even people here that don't agree with the stance. But we as a leadership, we've come together, just like we don't want to trivialize it, but at the same time, we don't want to make it any more important. But just like we're deciding the color of a paint for a room or whatever, like a certain body decides that, and that's just kind of how things go. But we're opening up this avenue for people to kind of talk and discuss so we can help you better understand how we came to this decision to stand on that, instead of just saying, this is what it is, agree with it or whatever, but we're moving forward.
I don't know about that. I mean, I guess I'm talking more about I'm not a fan of top-down decisions, so I guess I just disagree.
Well, I agree with that too.
Methodology, but I think coming in terms of coming to a consensus, because I think that's really important for a community's identity, right? To be able to say, like, this is what we definitively believe Jesus would want, I mean, I get, but on the other hand, that's why we've gotten ourselves in so much trouble with religion and politics.
Yeah. I belong to a Congregationalist church where it's up to the individual to determine their religious convictions. But as a group, we've made statements about being open and inclusive to the LGBTQ community, participating in, marches and political elements like that are important to us. And as a pastor, it's hard for me because I look at the message of Jesus and it just looks inherently political. When you study like Roman history, when you read it in the context of the day, Jesus' statements were political statements. So you talked about nationalism being a turnoff for you when you were younger. And I think that's what I kind of always return to, is that I'm not necessarily interested in dividing people along party lines. I don't think that's where Christianity or Jesus the person fits. It's almost as if Jesus challenges all of my politics, all of my nationalism, all of when I look at the United States personally, I see this industrial military complex. Like the biggest significant portion of our presence in the world and in our own country is just militaristic. It's violence. It's necessarily using violence to prop up systems of oppression and greed, in my opinion. And when I see Jesus in the Roman Empire, I see a very like subversive politic that it's hard not to carry over into my church. So when Veterans Day comes up or nationalistic holidays, things like that, it's always really awkward for me because there are people in our church who are veterans, people who really find identity and meaning in their American patriotism. And it's like a cognitive dissonance for me as a minister to see Jesus and the story of Jesus critiquing all of that, just like critiquing the kinds of country that we are. And how do you participate in that without like, consciously criticizing or consistently criticizing it to the point where none of those people can even participate in our community?
I know it's an arbitrary line, but it seems to me when I think about these things is that that's that fine line of criticizing the system and not the people. So maybe if you're going to take a stand as a church against something, it should be against systems, against oppression, and never against people groups, never against individual people. So it's that like in the sense of the veteran, how do you honor the veteran for doing what they believed was right without glorifying the system that put them in that place?
Even if you believe what they did might not have been right, like killing.
Yeah.
How do you? It's just tough. Like all of the most important things that I see Jesus affecting in my life and affecting my politics. It's just weird as a minister to try not to personalize your ministry, to actually get to the root of what Jesus was about, and to see that butting up against people's convictions is hard.
Yeah, and especially if you have a national heritage, or the way people tell the story of our national heritage as being God ordained, like God loves America, God blesses America, God gave us America and manifest destiny. And I have a hard time with nationalism in particular because I think it can be a tremendously patriotic act to cry for revolution and to want to protect the innocent and to want to maintain the freedom and equality, that people set out to make, and when they set out to create a new form of country and a new form of government. But it is hard when on those few days like Veterans Day and Memorial Day and 4th of July, when it seems like we should, just like on Valentine's Day, some people say, okay, yeah, this is like a really commercialized, silly version of love. But at the same time, it helps us like remember and commemorate and treat with honor and deference our loved ones, so we can set aside our critical lens for one day and just come together and celebrate. But on the other hand, I mean, I heard a recent, I've been thinking about Valentine's Day because it was recently, but I heard someone criticize Valentine's Day like it was a tool created by the patriarchy to like satisfy women's desire to be treated as equal all year by just focusing in only on one day and treating someone super special as like this meta gesture of affection. And then the rest of the time that person can coast in the way they treat their partner, specifically men to women. So I think it can be sort of like an anesthetization of our consciences to say, well, one day you have to put aside your critical lens and you have to be nice.
Think about veterans that way on Veterans Day. So I understand how to treat veterans as a minister.
Complicated.
It's easy.
Yeah.
It's actually easy in one sense because everybody agrees, whether you're liberal or conservative, that what's happening to veterans, because the suicide rate is so much higher than even the lives that are lost in the wars. We're talking about
recent wars.
Yes, right? Recent wars. Yeah. The suicide rate's so high, we realize that we're not treating our veterans well. So it's easy for me as a minister to stand up and be like, look, our veterans are in a broken system, and many of them are broken and they're not receiving the help they need. And it's easy to see Christianity as a cry for justice in that scenario. But about critiquing the wars themselves, the things that put them in the place that they're in, like that's not a very popular, but the nationalistic thing I think is the main thing for me. And we've talked about that on this podcast kind of over and over through the last year. setting that kind of to the side for a second, what about like party politics? Should I be able to stand up as a minister and critique something that a politician said? Because it's what our people are talking about. It's what our national conversation is about. And if we can't, as a church, be a part of the dialogue, like, are we missing out on an opportunity? Technically, we'd lose our tax exempt status, but should we even have a tax exempt status? I mean, there's a lot of questions to think about.
And there's so many groups that abuse that privilege and they get away with it. And so it's hard to say that it's like morally wrong because it's illegal. Like, because I think sometimes like imagine if Martin Luther King Jr. like lost his tax exempt status for speaking out against injustice, and like if he had gotten deterred by that and not spoken out about certain things, like what would have happened to the civil rights movement? There really would have been none, if that had gotten in the way of him speaking out against injustice. But so I think that's the fine line to make, that you have to separate the issues from the candidates, and you have to separate justice from the legal structure. And notice, like, the legal structure is in the legislative structure of our government is a sphere, but that's not the only sphere that we exist in, right?
I think that's a little bit easy to say. That's much more
very radical.
Separate. You said separating the issues from the candidates. I think that's easier to say than do when the candidates make the issues all about themselves. Like, that's who they are to us. When I got sick this past week. Last, week, I got sick and I was on the couch all week. So I decided to watch the debates, all the Republican and Democratic debates. And I didn't realize like how entertaining it was. I don't know if that's a positive comment on our society or a negative one, but it was very entertaining. And I watched every single one. And the people that I see up there are the issues. They're no longer just regular people. They're like icons of different things. So to say that I can criticize building a wall between us and Mexico, or the approach that Donald Trump has, criticizing his rhetoric, criticizing his ideas, is really criticizing him, because that's all he is to me at this point. Does that make sense? Like, it's easier said than done to separate people and issues. So.
But that's exactly what you said we should do last week when we were talking about the death of Scalia and how we have to humanize the person and remember the person amidst the issues, that they're not the same thing.
I'm never going to sit down to lunch with him, though, And I don't. I'm just thinking about in church, you stand up and you say, should a minister ever say, like, this is wrong? What we're talking about as a society at the moment, treating people a certain way, treating illegal immigrants in our country as if they have no rights as human beings, and we need to rip them out of their homes, families, and communities and send them back, every single one of them, and deport a fourth of our population. That's what some people are saying from the Republican platform. And should I be able to stand up in church as a minister and say that's wrong? Or does that unnecessarily?
No, you can stand up and say that. You can say that.
But that's
right?
the very thing that bothered me.
Why wouldn't you say that?
But that's the very thing that bothered me when I was younger. People stood up and said, like,
maybe it's just a matter of, and maybe it's kind of a side issue, but maybe it's a matter of like reworking the art of the sermon or figuring out how we communicate things, because the way it's set up, and we've talked about this a little bit before, but the way it's set up is that the pastor is set up as the all-knowing, this person knows everything, and whatever comes from this pulpit bleeds down into everything else that we are as a community. And maybe when it comes to these particular issues, it's a matter of the minister taking the time and saying, here are all the areas in which I'm ignorant about this particular issue. Here's how I feel about this issue. Next week, we're going to bring this person in who is well aware of all these complicated things, and they're going to talk, and then we're going to have a Q&A after. Like, if we're going to address issues, making sure that we put it in a holistic way for people to feel like they can engage in a way that gets away from their understanding, because we talk about rhetoric and Donald Trump and other people going out there, but there's rhetoric from the left too, the way that they word things that have become so cliche that eventually they become devoid of meaning. You know what I mean? Like, even if what they say, if you wrote it on a piece of paper, it's right. There's nothing about it that's, I don't know. There's no meat to it. There's no like. I don't know. So to be able to provide context, around
sound bites, and
exactly.
We don't really take the time to look deeply into issues. Like, there's so many issues that it's almost like most people don't have time to really research, or they don't take the time to do that. But
you talked about being humble as a minister. I wonder if the problem is we assume that ministers could stand up and give anything but their opinion, right? Maybe that's the problem. Maybe I'm expecting myself to stand up and give the capital T truth, when really all I have is my opinion on the things that I've read or the God I've experienced or people. And we need to have a radical understanding of preaching as, this is me, this is my subjective experience. I have prayed and communed with the Spirit and read the scriptures, and this is my take on it. And I think that you should really consider this, because I think it's important, and I think it's important to God, as opposed to this is the truth and you have to listen and follow.
I would go farther than that. I would say it shouldn't be a one-sided discussion, and maybe that's what I would like to offer in this. That
interesting.
Maybe yes, politics don't belong in the pulpit. They belong in the discussion of the church. And there should be spaces that aren't sermon spaces, but that are really important forums for the church to talk about things together. And what I would offer, like, this goes back to systems theory, something we talked about a few weeks ago, is that maybe, if you have people in your church who, for example, believe that all the immigrants should be deported, instead of getting hung up on debating the actual issue itself, I think it'd be really important to come together and talk about what has informed people's opinions and what their fears are and what their hopes are, underlying that political stance. And I think that would be a lot more fruitful, right? Because maybe people are actually afraid of not being able to find jobs, or maybe they lost their job to an immigrant, or maybe they lost their house to an immigrant, or maybe they're afraid for their kids, or, way more difficult. But I think teaching people to tease out what has informed their positions is way like a public service, right? Because we all need to know what's formed us.
Talk about countercultural, sitting down to a space where we're not going to have the sound bites thrown at each other, but just sit together and talk. That's like that's what Jeff is talking about, doing conflict well as a community. And you're talking about creating that space where that conflict can happen in a productive way. That scares me to death as a minister, because basically we're trying to hold this fragile community together sometimes that has a veneer of commonality, like we all agree on the same thing, we're all in this together, when really under the surface there are things that motivate us very differently, and to dig down into those things might hurt this, the relationships that we have. But you're right, that's where more deep and intimate relationship happens, is when we can sit down and discuss our differences in a positive way.
And theorists call that diversity minimalization, where you kind of have like the rhetoric and the happy-go-lucky feelings of diversity, and you kind of like acknowledge it on a surface level, but you don't really get into the thick of it. But what happens is that actually blocks really deep relationships from forming, because nobody wants to skirt that surface level, that surface level to go deeper, because there's conflict under there. So they actually don't get to know each other, so but there are ways to do that. People have invented methodologies that help communities kind of what some theorists call engage impasse. And one of the ones that I think is phenomenal and I swear by is called circle process. And I did some training on that recently. And I think I've told you guys about this before off air, but circle process is incredible. It was developed by indigenous communities' methods of dealing with conflict outside legal structures. And so it's actually based in conflict resolution. And a lot of people are using this as alternatives to putting cases through court and dealing with issues on a communal and a family basis. So there's actually a lot of great resources out there that maybe people don't know about to handle and to have these really hard discussions. But it actually, what ends up doing is really building the community in a deep way.
The denomination I'm a part of tries to do that. They do something called sacred conversations, where they have little circle spaces. I think they use the same methodology. I don't know for sure, but where they talk about race or something, some sort of injustice, and then people are allowed to speak from all their different experiences. But that happens at a minister level, not a congregational level.
Well, it's interesting that when we talked about this and when we're thinking in terms of church, and when we recounted what we heard growing up, we all went back to what we heard from the pulpit. And I can't count on one hand how many times we had anything outside of the pulpit as a way to communicate or discuss an issue that we as a church were grappling with. So that goes back to, Mona, what you were talking about earlier, that whole idea of the top-down thing. There seems to be very little avenues for these circle discussions, and questions disarm. I have a easier time talking to someone who I disagree with, if I understand why we disagree and why that issue is important to them in the first place, as if I just saw their, flip it Facebook post or tweet or whatever that says, here's what I believe. And I have to, how do I get past that? And if we don't create ways to get past that, not only from us who believe that we're right to the other person, but from the congregation to the pulpit. Like if someone from the pulpit is putting something out there, this is fact and all that kind of stuff, and you don't allow for an interaction the other way, there's nothing can be done about that. You're just going to frustrate or isolate people or encourage a greater divide. And part of it is just the structure of church. How do you communicate and create those connections when everything in churches, whether it's been in evangelical churches or now in more progressive churches that I'm in now, everything comes down to Sunday morning. And I think that's a flawed perspective of the church in general.
Yeah. And it seems like, and this is one of my biggest beasts with churches, and honestly why I don't attend. I understand on one hand that sermon writing and sermon delivery is an art form, and it's a long tradition, and a lot of people love that tradition. It doesn't mean much to me personally because it's a monologue, not a dialogue. And I think everything in our modern technological world is pointing toward interactive dialogue. Like, we have not just people posting articles online, but people able to talk back to those articles. Like, all of it is creating dialogues and meta dialogues. And church still has this really old model of one person talking at everyone else. No offense to anyone who does sermon writings, because I'm sure those sermons are awesome. But the point is, like, I think the church, Alan, I love you so much and I have tremendous respect for what you do. But I think the church has an opportunity to be a space where people can talk across really strong differences. And we are so gridlocked in this country around the two-party system that when projects across the aisle actually go through, like when John McCain and Elizabeth Warren actually work together, it makes national and international news because we're so gridlocked into our ways, and so
our
I think
congregations, we just don't talk about it.
Exactly. You just don't talk about it. And because it's split churches, because like it can be explosive, it can be harmful to people's relationships and their psychology and their emotional. It can cause tremendous damage if it's not handled well. So I understand why people avoid it. I know of people who've been involved in church splits over politics and over Facebook debates of politics. I know of people for whom their church split over one Facebook thread, which is bonkers that can happen these days.
If Jesus is truly countercultural and political at the same time, maybe the most political thing we can do is go against the way we do politics as a country and actually create space for conversation. That's
what I'm saying. Yeah.
There's a guy, Howard Hendricks, he's a really conservative Dallas Theological Seminary professor for many years. I read his books in Bible college that really inspired me into teaching and preaching because his teaching methodology was just, I ate it up when I read it. Anyway, he said when he teaches and also when preaching, it's helpful. He has found selecting 3 people for a panel, very diverse people, different backgrounds, different experiences. Have those 3 people ready when you're done with your sermon to ask questions so that they're prepared. So the second it's done, it becomes a dialogue. And that's cool. They can push back. Yeah. They say, okay, so you said this, but what does that actually mean? Like, what do you think about this? Have you ever thought of that? And these 3 people are kind of like a voice of the congregation that changes it from a monologue to a dialogue. I've never tried it. I've actually only seen it once on a video, but something has to be done to create that space more often.
Or people can tweet questions in. I know actually some evangelical pastors do methods like that, but I do understand the problem.
That still feels
I do understand the
like
problems
though. I've seen that done. Yeah, I've seen that done. But it's more of, and it's kind of like what we do here. Like, someone tweets their question and then it's like a guru answering the question as opposed to inviting them to actually share their experience. Not just a question, but like, this is my experience and this is gives rise to my question.
And every congregation, I'm sure, has that one person that like feels like a 20-minute story is an appropriate setting for a group dialogue, and wants to talk about their dog. And I once went to a Bible study of like very sweet people. I won't say anything about them because I don't want to come across as like negative in a certain way, but it's it's hard for those of us who exist in academic spaces where people have read things and have informed opinions. And then you go into a Bible study setting or a dialogue setting, with folks that are very well intentioned, but really don't have a critical lens. And, like in this particular Bible study, I'm going to sound like a jerk right now, so just be prepared. In this particular Bible study, we were reading the story of Noah, and this one person raises their hand and goes, I was in a flood once. And we're like, okay, why? I don't know. It was.
You are a jerk. That's just wonderful. Everybody needs to bring their experience to the text.
That's awkward.
It was awkward. It was like, it was interrupting the reading of the narrative. It wasn't even like an appropriate time to talk about.
Don't you appreciate that though? People that are not in the seat of power bringing their experience to the reading. Come on.
Well,
that has
ideologically, yes, but
it bothered me when I was in class.
We need some structure.
Whenever
we need to read the room, man.
Whenever we discussed philosophy in philosophy class in my undergraduate, it was almost like an onion. We would just keep unraveling till we get to the core of the what we're talking about, just like layer after layer after layer, and then someone would ask a question that's like 15 layers back. It was a little bit frustrating, for sure. But
yeah, so you need people who are trained in like moderating and upholding dialogue to make this stuff happen,
and to make it safe for everybody to be able to express what they really do believe in a safe way that doesn't harm other people.
And that's not to say, and I know 100% Mona, this is not what you're saying, but that's not to say that we should have so many qualifications on someone before they're allowed to speak.
Oh,
like
absolutely
there has to be a place. Yeah,
I'm saying there has to be a proper structure like that helps everyone have equal space in the room. And some people just take up more space in the room than others, and they're not as self-aware as others.
Like me.
Yeah. And so
if you do the yarn thing where you hold a ball of yarn and you pass it every time you talk, I'm always the person who has the biggest clump of yarn at the very end, because it'll be strings across the whole room. And every time someone speaks, they get to hold a little piece of the yarn. I always have the most, and I feel bad.
Maybe one of our analytically minded listeners should go through all of our episodes and give a percentage on who spoke
and who interrupted the most. It'll be me. I'm the queen.
And what I learned doing these circle groups and conflict resolutions, actually the people who talk less often have the most insightful things to say. No offense to Alan or myself who talk a lot, but often has the most insightful things to say. I'm just going to say
thank you, Mona.
And often those folks won't speak unless outright invited to speak, because they don't feel comfortable jumping in. And so it's really, really important to create space for everybody. So I guess, okay. So going back to our original question, like what's the place of politics in the pulpit or in faith community? Actually, now that we're talking through this, I think I have a firm stance on this, my firm opinion to this answer, to this question. I think that because the pastor has the same amount of citizenship as everyone else in the church, it shouldn't come from the pulpit. I think when the pastor has more of a political voice than everyone else, then it sets them up as a super citizen who has more right to speak, right?
But what if everyone the gospel has one vote. Political?
Well, no, I'm saying when it comes to actual like definitive issues and like campaign things that people are voting on like currently or especially not to endorse a certain candidate, but
well, okay, so two things for that is that from a pastor's perspective, number one is that as a pastor, you're not a part of the community anyway. You're a hired hand. Like the whole system has to be subverted in churches to really accomplish that wholeheartedly, because a pastor comes and goes, the people of the congregation are staying there. And in most churches, there's even an unwritten or sometimes written law that when the pastor leaves, they literally need to leave. They can't stick around. They can't communicate because you need to leave room for the next person. So while I 100% agree with that statement, that is much easier said than done when it comes to the position of a pastor, because I think that to really do that well, it would require a very different dynamic on the way that the church structure views that position in the first place.
Interesting. So this is part of a larger conversation. So maybe the pastor can be responsible for articulating the denominational or community stance that the community is like officially taken, but I'm saying more to their own personal opinions about politics and how you should vote. I think even if it wasn't illegal for pastors to endorse a certain candidate, I still think that should be an ethical code, because pastors wield so much influence. It's tremendous. And as a pastor's kid, and I'm sure you guys can attest to this too, but I've seen people put pastors on an extraordinary pedestal, and it's not healthy for anybody. And pastors I've seen pastors go out of their way to say like, I'm not I'm not God. I don't speak for God. But people do that anyway because that's a cultural thing. And you can't prevent people from taking your word as gospel. So how do you create a system or a structure that's going to prevent people, that's going to cause people to like think more for themselves and encourage them to think more for themselves?
And if Jesus was actually questioning the authority of Rome, sitting there as a preacher of the gospel and putting people in power by using your power to manipulate or to influence people to just select a certain candidate is the very thing that we should be going against as ministers of the gospel. Anyway.
Yeah. So I think we should end on this question. So we're talking about what is the place of politics in the church and all that kind of stuff, but what makes something political? Like, what was political now wasn't political 20 years ago. So if a church starts talking about a particular issue and then it becomes political, because the idea of politics is subjective in of itself, what do we do with that?
Because I think if we have a system where it's a dialogue and not a monologue, then you can pretty much talk about anything you want. I'm saying, like, if you have that larger systemic change, then you don't have to figure out political or non-political. Like, you always bring those conversations to the group discussion. That's what I'm trying to say. But
once it becomes political in the eyes of, like, what makes it political?
Jeff's onto something, because we talked about the refugee crisis before it became a refugee crisis at the youth at our church, because it was a part of our denomination's identity, was that we took care of refugees, people who were fleeing, and we thought of a lot of quote unquote illegal immigrants as refugees, as you know, the interviews in the past have shown on our podcast. But the moment that the Civil War led to this large influx of refugees to Europe and to America, and then all of a sudden it became a national conversation, pretty soon it was politicized. And now it's a marker of whether you're a conservative or a liberal. And we were talking about it before that. And then all
I would say it was political long before it was politicized in the media. I think it's political if it has to do with current events, legislation, and the Commonwealth and the common good. That's political.
Okay.
Basically, all social ethics are political. Anytime you're dealing with what is the right and best course of action is political. Anything you're dealing with, like laws and
maybe
regulation,
I can give you an example so you can help me. Here's a concrete example. We talked about God loving our entire world. There was a psalm that talked about God's faithfulness to the world extending even to the animals. There's a psalm that says God saves animals and God cares for our environment, was kind of the theme of the Sunday. And not very far, we talked about the Delta Tunnel thing. I think I've mentioned this in a previous episode, but to stand up there and say, we need to oppose this legislation that threatens a wildlife refuge. If I stand up and say that, am I unnecessarily politicizing the message? Or should we just allow people to connect the dots themselves? Like, oh, God cares for the world. This application is political, so I can't say it. I just need to let them kind of find it for themselves. Like, is that?
Well, no, I think you can. I think there's a third way you can stage the conversation and say, like, given what we've been talking about and learning, what is our interpretation of this event?
What do we
as
do
a community?
Here?
How can we talk about it? What do we do together? Yeah, and then when people get to talk about it, they get to take ownership of it and they get to feel empowered, which is really important in a world where a lot of us feel disenfranchised from our political systems.
I would love to go to a church like that.
those community molecular political entities and communities and discussions are super important. I want to offer one really interesting thing, and I'm taking a class on political theology right now, so this is really apropos for my personal studies. But I came across this book in one of the syllabuses called Hebrew Republic, and it's a really interesting. This was fascinating to me because I think what happens to a lot of us in liberal land is that we want to separate church and state because we don't want either one to get too powerful, and we are really wary of people who call for a theocracy, right? And want the kingdom of God to like look like the American government or vice versa. But this book has a really interesting exposition on how when Hebrew came to be studied through the Protestant Revolution and the Hebrew Bible was not read anymore as an allegory for Jesus, but those texts were taken more like contextually for themselves. And people started reading the Talmud, which are commentaries on the Hebrew Bible by ancient Jewish scholars. Then a lot of the leaders in the Renaissance and the Protestant Reformation era recovered ideas of religious diversity and tolerance and building a commonwealth for all people from these texts. So what I'm trying to say is that was a lot of like shop talk. But what I'm trying to say is that just because you bring religion into conversation with politics doesn't mean you're automatically calling for a theocracy or calling for no religious diversity. Actually,
Absolutely.
This author argues that the ideas of religious diversity and common good come from religion and are inspired by Jewish thought in particular. So I was really excited about that because I think a lot of people will say, our governmental structures are secular and religion has no place in the conversation. But actually, a lot of people would say that the governmental structures come from religion and therefore they're always going to interact, always. And so drawing a line feels fuzzy.
That's a middle way.
It is fuzzy.
That's a middle way because I've heard people say our country was founded on Christian principles and we should be a theocracy. That's where we
should be a Christian theocracy.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's either all or nothing, but maybe that.
And other people say, no, we should have an atheistic state and there should be no place for religion. But I think it's totally fair to be like, my religion inspires me to take this stance because I believe that God loves creation. Therefore, I oppose the Delta thing. That's what I think we're trying to get at, that it's appropriate as long as you're holding it kind of loosely and humbly to say, no, my religion does inspire me to see the world in this way and to work for change.
Like that.
But there are places to not be humble, though. Martin Luther King, right? He took a stance, and it wasn't even humble. I guess it was humble.
We should have a whole conversation about humility. We don't know what that is.
I think we have all very different views on what humility is.
We'll save that for another time.
Yes.
All right. So what are your takeaways for this conversation?
I hear you guys saying something awesome. I came in with a question, and now I'm leaving with a little bit more of a feeling that there needs to be dialogue. Politics require dialogue, or it's just the same old stuff that's causing problems that we have right now.
Yeah, and there are really amazing church traditions that have incredible political legacies, like the AME, the African Episcopal Methodist Church of America. Read the history of that church and what they've done for civil rights. Totally amazing, very inspiring. So I think the church can be a place to empower people for regaining their political voice and fighting against oppression. And it has been for many, many, many years. So when you participate in politics through your local faith community, you are also tapping into that amazing legacy.
And I would say if you are involved in church leadership, be creative about how to create that dialogue. Don't be afraid to subvert your own system. And if you're involved in a congregation that's not necessarily in the leadership of the church, feel comfortable to question that leadership or those stances in a way that's creating a dialogue like we've talked about. I think that's kind of the theme is creating that space. And if you're in a place that won't allow that space to be created, then, I'm not going to say what you should do. I'll leave you to your own conclusion. So on that, I think that's a good way to end. Let us know what you think, because I feel like I'm leaving with a few more questions than I have answers. So if you have anything to add to this conversation, you could do that at the show notes at irenicast.com/52. That's irenicast.com/52. On the other side of the music, we will be playing our brand new segment, Out of Context. Okay, so I'm kind of excited about this. I think this is going to be fun. So how this segment is going to work, that we're calling Out of Context, is each of us have come up with 2 quotes from one of the many presidential candidates this political cycle from either side of the fence. And we've taken a quote and we've censored very specific words within the quote to make it sound as though it is a risque. Whatever. And then the job of the other hosts is to guess what the person is actually talking about, and then we'll reveal who get the quote. Does that sound like a good explanation of what we're doing here?
I think so. I think we're good.
Okay. So who would like to start?
I can start.
Okay.
This is a quote from Marco Rubio. He said, "What I'm not. I can't control other people's. If they decide that's what they want to do with their time and money, they certainly have a right to do it."
What is the censored word? Can you read it one more time?
Yeah. What I'm not. I can't control other people's. If they decide that's what they want to do with their time and money, they certainly have a right to do it. From a Republican.
Not an abolitionist.
Not socially
if people
Republican
want,
Party,
liberal.
Alan. That's a big word.
What? No. Oh
not
my
socially
gosh.
liberal person.
That was horrible. That was horrible, Jeff. Saying that that's too big of a word for a Republican candidate. Wow. I was saying abolitionist because he's referring to alcohol. If people want to drink alcohol, they want to do that with their time and their money. That's fine.
What is this, 1922? What? Why would he say that? No.
I can't think of anything, honestly, that he would
Jeff,
say.
you got anything?
I'm just going to go simple since I would say that, well, I'm not going to give my great opinion, but it almost always seems to come down to money. So but then he said that. Now I'm confused. Man, I don't know. That's difficult.
What did he say?
I'm just going to guess and say, yeah, just tell us what he said.
The word was campaigns.
Oh.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Very nice.
It's not even a good quote. It's just when
I'm telling you,
it's
this
just when
is
you
harder.
when you admit the word, it's just
Okay,
it sounds
I've got a
funnier.
good one.
Yeah. Okay.
You ready? All of the flirted with me, consciously or unconsciously. That's to be expected.
Who said it?
I'm not going to tell you. Can you guess?
Alan, no, you have to tell us. It's funnier if you tell us. No, I don't want to guess.
Donald
That's
Trump.
not the game.
Donald
Okay.
Trump.
Can you say the quote one more time?
All of the flirted with me, consciously or unconsciously. That's to be expected.
Oh boy. Must have been the hair. If I were around that hair, I wouldn't be able to not flirt with him anyway.
Hey, isn't it men who are either tall or have a lot of money? Isn't that what it is? Just one or the other.
I don't know.
No.
I think people
All
are
right.
into all kinds of things.
So I'm going to say reporters. All the reporters flirted with me.
Ooh, that's a good guess.
I'm going to say news outlets. No, that's too similar to what Jeff said. I'm just going to go ahead and say women. Just
Okay.
all of the women.
It is women, but it's
Yes.
technically, he says, all of the women on The Apprentice flirted with me, consciously or unconsciously. That's to be expected.
Boy.
Oh my
I
goodness.
can relate. Every woman I've ever met, all she did was flirt with me constantly from the time I met her, to the time she walked away. That's it.
If by flirting with you, do you include like, hi, how are you doing today? Like, how are we defining the flirting?
That's the question.
Just general conversation.
Yeah, it's just impossible. It's expected. It's impossible with someone with that kind of animal magnetism to have a regular relationship with a woman. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It doesn't happen.
Okay, here's my quote. This is from Jeb Bush, former Florida governor.
Oh no, he dropped out. I like his face. I don't know. He seems like a sweet person. He doesn't seem like he's very menacing to me.
He seems like a sweet person, like a loaf of bread seems like a sweet person.
I have no comment. All right, so here's the quote. Donald, you're not going to be able to your way to the presidency. That's not going to happen.
Oh boy. I'm going to say arm wrestle.
I was
Strong
going to
arm.
say either pay or shout. I'm going to say shout.
Shout. And you're saying what?
Strong arm.
Strong arm?
Because
I
I
think-
can't say sleep with. Oh, you just said that.
I was thinking of a different word, but
Sleep. Yeah,
same thing.
Very
exactly.
nice. Very nice.
Okay, so yeah, you're kind of both right. The word is insult.
Okay.
Insults. Oh.
Jeb's wrong.
I think that's...
I'm sorry, but he is dead wrong. That is Donald Trump can do that.
Apparently is doing
It feels
that
like he's on the road
currently.
towards that.
Yeah. Oh boy. Okay. All right. My next one comes from Hillary Clinton, and she says, "My 2 secrets to staying healthy: all the time, and if you can't, use or." And the other is hot peppers. I eat a lot of hot peppers. For some reason, I started doing it in 1992, and I swear by it.
Oh, that's good.
Yes. Hey, the hot pepper thing actually is true. It increases your hormones that burn fat, but that's a side
Nice.
topic. So what does she swear by?
All the time, and if you can't, use or.
I'm going to say laugh all the time. And if you can't, use love and compassion. You know why I say that is because those to me feel very generic, and that's the impression I get of Hillary is that this kind of like paint by the numbers speeches that kind of hit all the main points but have no
it's an
feeling
art.
to them. But that's my opinion.
She's a very established politician.
Yes,
she knows what
it's
she's
an
doing.
art
Exactly.
to avoid sound bites these days. It's painful. You
That's
have
true.
to.
That's a good point.
Yeah, there's some pressures on them that we
should do this game later with our quotes from the past shows.
Oh boy.
Or just a show of sound bites.
You can remember what we said.
Man,
Yeah,
I don't
there you
know
go.
what I can say that's not going to sound dirty. What I would say, hug my kids all the time, and if you can't, use a pillow. Hug a pillow. Make yourself.
Oh.
The way that sounds.
The difference
hug a
between
pillow or
hugging a
what?
pillow and suffocating your child.
Or
with
use a
pillow.
tree or a stranger's child.
Alan's going to go with hugging, and Jeff's going to go with, what'd you say again, Jeff?
Smiling.
Laughing,
and
laughing.
Laughing.
All right. My 2 secrets to staying healthy. Wash your hands all the time. And if you can't, use Perel or one of the other sanitizers.
Wait, she's advocating for creating super bacteria? That's like undemocratic of her.
What?
No, I'm pretty sure Perel was just one of her sponsors.
Maybe. Who makes Purell? Johnson
Big
& Johnson
soap.
or something?
Yeah,
She turned
probably.
around and there was like a badge of it on her blazer next to her Pepsi logo. Sorry, that's just my cynicism coming through. I apologize.
You're against big soap, Jeff? Is that what
Yes, I am.
That's awesome.
Okay.
Okay, here's another one. No one can make you feel without your consent. And I didn't realize we were supposed to do candidates from the present, so I chose Eleanor Roosevelt. I did not know that it was current politicians.
You're not paying attention, man.
Of course you
okay,
did.
wait. No one
Of
can
course
make
you
you
did.
feel inferior without your consent.
Ooh, nailed it.
That's
right.
a famous quote. That's why I knew it.
So you knew it from a famous
Yeah.
woman.
Yeah.
I thought it was funny.
Why is it funny?
I think it's more
No one
funny
can
that
make you
you
feel-
chose Eleanor Roosevelt, that your mind automatically went back to like the 30s and 40s, and that's
Well, you're
just where
thinking
you're at.
no one can make you feel sexy without your consent, or you're hoping that we would say
Or feel other things, but that's just
Oh, well.
Right. Wow.
All right.
That was supposed to be. We were supposed to make dirty jokes. Is what I thought. I'm reaching here.
No, we were supposed to
okay?
make it sound dirty, not like
this is out of
actually.
But that's
my
an actual
wheelhouse,
famous
okay?
quote from Eleanor Roosevelt.
Okay, I'm an idiot. How about that?
You're not an idiot. No one can make you feel like an idiot without
Oh,
your
that's
consent.
right. Oh my gosh, I don't consent to you guys laughing at me right now. Okay. You can laugh, but I will not internalize this. I'm beautiful and smart, and
my
everybody
goodness.
likes me.
Is this the podcasting equivalent of bullying?
I think so.
Alan,
This is my
you
own
are
family
beautiful
too.
and smart,
Hey,
and
look,
everybody
my
likes
family's
you.
laughing at me again. I just said this is what happened early on.
It's because
Oh
we
my
love
gosh.
you, because you're awesome.
I know.
And you let yourself be the brunt of the joke, which I think takes a big person.
Okay, only
to
I
do.
think that there's a causative thing there. I think I was the brunt of the joke so much to where it's just comfortable for me, and it's actually really tragic. So
It's like
the
your
place
childhood
to
blankie.
occupy.
it is. It's comfortable.
I
Jeff,
don't
what's
like
yours?
being the brunt of the joke. I'm not
All
very
right,
good
here's
at
the
it.
last quote. Okay, this is from Bernie Sanders.
Feel the burn.
Can these guys talk about anything other than their desire to?
I'm gonna say kill. I'll just say it right away because that's probably what it is. Bomb people. He's probably talking about the Republican candidates, but
Other
but
than
it
their
could be any number
desire
of things.
to
I
jerk off
did.
in the woods.
I was about to say. I was about to say I did want to. You said it's something about strong arm, Donald Trump strong arming, and people doing stuff in public, and how these debates are so like weird in public. I wanted to use the term masturbatory for what happens in front of the whole. It's like voyeurism. We're
Those
all
debates
watching
are
these
totally
people.
masturbatory.
They are just vitriolic, just pouring what comes to mind. We're just gonna do it in front of everybody, and it's shameful, but we'll eat it. We will.
But to know that it's completely, completely calculated is quite disturbing, isn't it?
I don't even know.
It's like calculated idiocy.
All of it is calculated.
You know,
like,
I'm not.
Did you know
allowed
that
to say
PR
this.
people are now advising people in the public like how to move so that they can be like GIFable, like so that the movement that they have within a thing, that there'll be a meme or a GIF or GIF or whatever people say.
Wow.
Like it's down to that minute thing. Like if you move like this, it'll be fun and it'll get more play.
What
It's crazy,
in the
right?
World?
You know,
Man, we live in a crazy
I can't say
time.
this. I can't say this from the pulpit, and because we are unregulated here, I can say it here. I apologize to all my Donald Trump supporting friends and family. But I honestly believe deep down that Donald Trump does not want to be president. I really do believe he is doing everything in his power to get some of the limelight and to get a lot of the positive things that he stands to gain as a corporate entity himself. And he's just trying to say outrageous stuff and do things that will disqualify him. Problem is, his followers won't let it happen. They're going to push him all the way to the top and not let him back away after saying something that, you know, breaks all the rules. So
you think he's just garnering up publicity for a new reality show?
No, kind of. I think
He
people
could
are.
be.
I think people
I
are
hope
so
so.
I think people were so desperate to prove that corporations are people too that they're putting one in the presidency.
Man,
That's it.
that could be like a conspiracy novel or something. But I mean, to the same degree that Trump is kind of changing the game, Bernie's trying to change the game on the total opposite end of the spectrum of trying to take the money out of politics. Like, no matter what you think about
Sorry,
his
that's a noble thing. I feel
issues.
like Donald is just taking advantage of the limelight, and
you think
feel
he's
like
trolling
Bernie,
the entire country?
Yeah,
It feels that way.
It does feel that way.
Do you really think? Do you really feel like he's serious that he wants to do that job? I don't think so. I think he's just really like waiting for the nation to be like, all right, dude, that was enough. Like,
Well,
you
he'd
go
either
home
have to
now.
like leave his business exploits, right? Because it's such a demanding job, or basically turn the White House into a business if it's not already.
Yeah.
But like,
Well, all the other politicians are talking about, you know, not taking big donations and stuff like that, but like Trump is the donor. So it's you know, he talks
he's
about,
getting
oh,
the
I'm
money
not
out of
taking all this
corporation
stuff.
stands to benefit. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Interesting.
probably
Anyway,
get into office.
do you want to
and turn
know
it
the
into
end
a
of the
reality
quote,
show.
or are we just gonna, you know?
Oh, sorry.
Yes, I do.
Well, yeah. What did Bernie say? Because I'm feeling the burn right now. I need to know.
Alan, you're the closest. It's, can these guys talk about anything other than their desire to go to war?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
That
Seriously.
was a tweet from Bernie Sanders during the Republican debate in September.
Well done.
You know, I don't mean to just slay all the Republican candidates, but I can't listen. I said I listened to all the debates, right, when I was sick. People said stuff like, we're going to make the sand glow. Like, who? That's like,
What
that's
does
just
that mean?
insane. Carpet bomb. Like Ted Cruz said he wanted to carpet bomb the terrorists and their families and do it so much that the sand glows during a debate. And I was like,
Good Lord.
I don't even think we should. I think we should. I'm not going to call for like vigilantism, but metaphorically, we need to like revolt against that kind of rhetoric from our leaders. Like those people should be banished and exiled. That kind of like
We should make the carpet glow with them.
no. We should banish them and exile them from our public sphere. I don't think people who misrepresent who we are to that kind of extent should even be allowed to speak in public anymore. And I know that's
the problem is, and you know, this segment's turning into a new episode, but you know, the problem is that people are voting, so that there's that striking a chord with someone or some group of people, and we've created a system where no one is who they say they are. And I think that's why me, Bernie Sanders is so refreshing.
Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders.
because it just seems genuine, and to me that's so rare in general when it comes to the political process. Like, I think Donald Trump, like, I agree. I think Donald Trump is playing a character. I think he's gotten used to the publicity mode of a reality television star.
Recently,
and I think
he said he would act completely different if he was the president.
Yeah, I saw that. And not only that, but I think, honestly, and this is just my opinion, but I think Hillary is a different side of that same coin, where she's been in the political game so long, it just feels that nothing new. Yeah, I don't know. It's not inspiring. It's like, okay, that's fine.
She's a mystery to me. There are so many people that criticize her so often. They've made a profession out of it that I don't even know how to.
That's
think
very
about
true.
her. It's hard, or anybody.
There's a conspiracy out there that actually makes sense to me, that Trump is basically consorting with some of the other candidates who shall be remain nameless, because I can't validate this, I think, but there might be evidence to suggest that he's conspiring with certain other candidates to become a foil for them and drive people toward them by becoming
He's the heel?
like their exact
awesome.
inverse. their exact inverse. Yeah.
That's like
Isn't that
professional-
nuts?
That's like wrestling, right? You have to have the
It's-
heel
Yeah.
that drives
I
people
could
toward
do-
the hero.
It's very interesting. I mean,
Super
It's
interesting.
exactly what it is. Though I think
Yeah.
this is a perfect way to end our political episode is with conspiracy theories. It's perfect.
And us
So-
endorsing or not endorsing certain candidates. Awesome.
Exactly. So that'll do it for us this week. If you enjoy what you hear or are completely irate with what you hear, let us know. And you can contact us all the time at irenicast.com/feedback for all the ways to let us know your opinions, questions, comments, concerns, and everything regarding the show. And if you'd like to support the show because you love it or like it, you can do that and find all the ways to do that at irenicast.com/support. So for this week, this super Tuesday, I'm
Super
Jeff.
Tuesday. I'm Mona.
And I'm Alan.
Thanks for joining the conversation.
Let's make it a dialogue.
We did it. We talked about it.
You keep ending with whispers.
Right.
It's getting disconcerting.
Because
I
you
want-
won't whisper with us.
I know. It's more powerful that way.
It's powerful.
I think it's creepy. You know why I think it's creepy?
Drives it
It's
home.
because I was listening to one of the
All right. Should I
All
press
right.
stop now? I'm doing it.
Okay.